consolidated on the deep fiscal reforms that were initiated in the first Modi government by my friend, the late Arun Jaitley. In the second term, during Nirmala Ji's budgets being presented, India consistently remained the fastest growing large economy in the world. Now, sometimes questions are raised that what is the importance of being the fastest growing large economy? How does it benefit the Aam Aadmi? How does it benefit the average Bharatiya? I will tell you, madam. Because this growth has enabled the massive increases in allocations and the massive improvement in outputs and results that have been demonstrated in the last 10 years. And this has been commented upon by a wide variety of experts around the world. And I will refer to some of them. Now, if you look at just a few weeks ago, looking at the data coming out for the financial year that we just completed and entered this financial year, these are the words of some of the pink papers in both India and abroad. I quote one, but this has been repeated many different times. Quote, in 2024, India has experienced significant economic growth, with exports reaching a record high of $776 billion at an 11.8% increase. The unemployment rate has dropped to a record low of 3.1%, and business activity and job creation are at an 18-year high, reflecting a robust economy. Now, madam, some of my friends in the opposition branches get a little triggered when we cite some of these statistics. So I'll have to issue a trigger warning. But the data indicates, if you look at the job creation data, for example, in just look, I'll tell you where it is manipulated. The manipulated data comes from certain organizations where the head of the organization is the head of your manifesto drafting committee. When you cite organizations where the head of that organization is the head of your manifesto drafting committee, that is biased. This is not biased. These are RBI data. These are reflected by the World Bank and by the IMF and by India's pink papers. Next, just in the manufacturing and services sector, in the last 10 years, 89 million jobs have been created. Compare this with only 66 million in the previous 10 years. Look at the economic survey that preceded the budget just a couple of days ago. The economic survey points out that the percentage of youth who are deemed employable has improved from 34% to 51% in the last decade. And this work is being taken forward with many other steps to be mentioned in this budget, which I will come to. Madam Chairperson, I think while increasing these allocations, I'll refer to some of the increased allocations in infrastructure and other areas. While increasing these allocations, for example, my previous speaker just mentioned allocations to health. I think the House deserves to know that in the last 5 years, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, Nirmala Ji allocated a compounded annual growth rate of allocation to the health sector of 9.5%, which is a new record. Madam, the system has to have a capacity to absorb, and that's why it has to be stepped up gradually. You cannot beat this high CAGR commitment to health. But madam, I think one of the most impressive parts of the Modi government, especially in the last 5 years, is how the fiscal deficit has been managed, despite these high allocations for the growth of India. And madam, I refer to the fiscal deficit, it gets referred a lot, but I want to take a moment to go behind why it is important. Madam, in this House, not just in the Treasury benches, but also in the opposition benches, there are many friends with whom I have personally sat and engaged in discussions with multilateral and global financial institutions, and they point out that the single biggest factor they look at when giving a country rating is the fiscal deficit. And that is what impacts inflation, that is what impacts our exchange rate, to what some of our friends have been referring to. Madam, the fiscal deficit, which was inherited 10 years ago at 4.5%, was continually brought down in Modi ji's first government until it reached 3.4%. And then the whole world was turned upside down because of the COVID pandemic, and India managed it far better than all other countries. But yes, of course, we saw a rise of the fiscal deficit to 9.2%. But the roadmap that has been shown since then by the Honorable Finance Minister has been rigidly adhered to, coming down year after year to 6.7%, 6.4%, 5.9%, 5.8%, 5.6%, 4.9% this year, and her commitment to bring it back down to 4.5% next year is extremely commendable. Madam, one of the challenges of high growth rate is sometimes it does create inequalities. And that is an allegation that some of our friends have been wrongly making. And I'll tell you why, madam. Because inequality is something that is measured. There is something called the Gini index, which measures inequality in a society across all countries. Madam, the reality is India's Gini index, which started out 10 years ago in the mid-30s, has remained in the mid-30s. Inequality has not changed by economic parameters. And, madam, why this is particularly impressive? But Gini index, why just look it up? It's very simple, you can Google it.